Hello everybody, and welcome to an interview with one of my debut authors, Xanti Bootcov. This is People with Passion, and I am so excited to be talking to her today. Xanti came to me just over 2 years ago, and she said, I have got a story to write. And she proceeded to tell me the story that she had to write. And I agree with her. She certainly had a story to write. The thing was, she confessed to me that she had never written before, that she wasn't a writer. And I assured her that with the kind of story that she was carrying inside of her, that she would find a way to put this on the page. And has she put this story on the page? We are so excited at Joanne Fedler Media because we are publishing her amazing book called But They Look So Happy, which is Xanti sharing the story of her experience of adopting 2 young orphans from Mexico that she met in a Mexican orphanage. So Xanti, thank you so much for taking the time to talk with me today and to share with me a little bit about the journey that you have gone on in writing this book.
Thank you so much for having me here. Yeah, I'm excited to be here, Joanne.
So, Xant, tell the readers a little bit about why you decided to write this particular story. Tell us a little bit about the story and why you felt so strongly that this was a story you had to put down on the page.
Well, like any story, there's so many different beginnings that it's hard to actually say what was the initial part of the story. But the upshot is that while I was living in Mexico, I ended up volunteering in an orphanage, and I met my children there. And it was not a nice and pretty place. It was not what the first world countries seem to think that orphanages are like, and some of them are beautiful, but this was not one of them. And my boyfriend and I at the time became very close to the boys, and just one thing literally led to the other, and we adopted the boys, and we thought love would conquer all, and we teach them to trust and safety, and it would be smooth sailing. And it wasn't. There were a lot of difficulties and hard experiences for all of us. And as time went by and we kept on thinking, we've got it, we're almost there, constantly there was the problem of lack of trust, and it was very difficult to settle in as a family. As a result, 15 years later, we were still all really struggling, and by that time the kids had actually grown up. And I moved to Mauritius through a whole chain of events, and I was broken. I was just a broken human being, and that's more or less when I had contacted you. And I really started writing to just understand my place in that story and try and see what went wrong and how we could have done things differently or better. Obviously, I thought we could do things better. And I really started writing this. And I'll be honest here, I started writing this to shut the voices up in my head because they were on a constant loop. It didn't matter what mood I was in. It didn't matter what I was doing, who I was with. There was this constant chatter of failure going on in my head because I felt that I had not secured my kids, had not taught them love and trust and security. And it broke me because we just felt, both of us, we felt that we should have been able to do better. And it minimized everything that we had done. And so I started writing after I contacted you. And the more I started writing, the more I started understanding. And then as life would have it, it just sent people my way. So I started meeting other people who were going through adoptions or had been through adoptions and now were going through some similar types of turmoil. I met some people who had been touched by adoption by a cousin, and they were trying to understand why things were so hard. And people think that adoption is this beautiful story, and it can be. It absolutely can be. But there are so many types of adoption and so many reasons, and most people look at adoption and go fairy tale. And, you know, and
so
fairy tales.
This is really the antidote to that sort of very naive fairy tale understanding of what adoption really means, especially, I guess, in the case of a later adoption, as your boys were. They were both 6 years old, right, when you adopted them, and there were things that had happened to them that you had no idea what they'd been through, but you knew that there had been all kinds of neglect and difficulties that they had experienced, but you didn't know what, right? So it was like you took these boys, knowing that they had histories behind them that you would never know, which is a very unusual thing, isn't it, for a parent to take on a child whose history you have no idea about, but you knew that there was a lot of pain already there. And what
we knew.
Yeah, sorry.
Yeah. We knew that. We weren't naive. We didn't think it was going to be easy. Parenting is never easy, no matter what type of parent. But there is an added layer, and especially the older the child is and the more you don't know. And so it was these people that were called into me. I would tell them my story and they would understand their story a little bit. And they started to understand the fairy tale of adoption from both sides. It's just not the way we think it is. And knowing that there are these hardships, and by this stage I had started to understand more about neuroscience and how the brain starts to develop and the developmental stages and the effects that those have. And so I was just talking to everybody about what I had been going on in my head and what I'd been writing down. And these people started telling me that they understood better, and I started having people phoning me up and saying, can I send my friend to you? She's just going through this and that. And at that point, I realized that although I'd started to try and understand my story, I pretty much had written up a mind dump of nonsense. And at that point, I thought, I want to write this book to help other people, because knowing a story is true and someone else has been through it and is still going through it and is still trying to find the light at the end of the tunnel can often be helpful.
Absolutely.
And at that point, I actually approached my kids and I said, I have been writing to try and understand what's going on. We all felt so alone, and I've got this big chunk of what could possibly be a book. And both of them agreed that if this is something that could help other people not feel so alone and not blame themselves and blame each other, that I should do it. And
how
they
wonderful.
both contributed.
Yes, how wonderful. I want to talk a little bit more about the way you did manage to involve your boys in the writing of this book as well, because I think that is one of the most exquisite elements of this book. I mean, this book actually makes me cry every time I just look at it. It just, to me, there are just so many elements here of such love, such love of your boys, such self-love, such you've taken so much care in telling this story, which is such a painful story, but you've done it with so much grace and so much care to ask permission to validate the experiences that your boys had, to include them in why this was something necessary, to write. And so my question to you is, having written this book, those voices that go through your head, failure, has finishing this book, has that had any impact on that narrative that has been going through your head around how you felt about being a mother to these boys?
Yes, it absolutely has, because in writing this book, I was able to understand my place in the story, and I was able to actually see some of the successes. There was a huge success that we had that we never even noticed until I wrote this book. I mean, obviously our kids, it's a cross-cultural adoption, and that can be very tough, and that was something that I hadn't noticed was a huge success. Of all the problems we've had, that was not one of them. And I had not noticed it because there were so many fires to put out that I had not noticed that there had been a fire that we put out before it even got started. And it taught me acceptance. It taught me it taught me to look at it and see that there were some things that I did well, and that there were some things that I wasn't supposed to actually fix. I couldn't fix, and that all I could do was hold the space until my children will be ready to fix themselves. So there was a lot of healing in the writing. So make no mistake, I healed from the story that I wrote, but I do want people to know it because I'm hoping that it gives them a perspective in their lives that will help them understand what's going on in their stories, because no story is the same. But there is a thread for everyone in that story, whether it's an adoption or a family dysfunction. There's a thread through there that I think will touch a lot of people.
Oh, there's absolutely no question about it. I mean, that's one of the reasons why I was so keen to publish this book, because this is not, for me, in the end, really, you know, the details of your story are fascinating and difficult and interesting, and you've got such a beautiful, quirky writing style with your own brand of humor that you've managed to inject into this narrative, you know, which I think is just so incredibly beautiful. But what is so fantastic, you know, for me about this book is that it really does raise questions about, you know, how we mother not just even our children, but parts of ourselves. Because I feel like there was you know, you were able to, you know, really mother the part of yourself that felt like a failure. And for me, what I love so much about this narrative is the way in which you came to value everything that you and your husband did, everything you gave, all the love you gave, even if it could never have been received. And in that acknowledgement of the love that you were and still continue to give to your boys, even though it's unwanted, there was like a return of self-love and a self-acknowledgement. And as you know, you've written it so beautifully in the book, I can't remember the exact phrase, but it was like the way you put it was that you found these boys and nobody had ever done anything for them, and that all that you and your husband wanted to do was you wanted to do something for them. You were the only ones who ever did something for these boys. And you also describe in the book how it was almost like when you met them, it was like stepping on a landmine. Can you talk a little bit more about that metaphor?
Well, it was actually, it was like standing on a landmine because to my mind, and I'm no soldier, but to my mind, if you step on the landmine, you haven't blown up yet, but the damage is done already. You know, you are already broken. It's just a matter of time. And in a way, that is how I felt. People would often say to me, knowing everything you've been through, would you have made a different choice? And that's where I say it was like standing on a landmine, because if I'd walked away from them in the orphanage, that would have broken me. And so I attempted to do what I didn't realize might be the impossible. And I got broken anyway. But I don't think that we could have done anything different. You know, I've heard of people walking into pet stores and walking out with a dog that they hadn't intended, and yet people don't understand that I could walk into an orphanage and get so close to these people. And I didn't look at them as, oh, those are my children. I looked at them as those are people that need help. And it doesn't matter what age they are, but I couldn't stop myself from wanting to help them and from wanting to care for them, from wanting to stop any kind of pain from happening to them. And as you know, as we've explained to friends, they were our children before they became our children. You know, we from the first time we took them out, we had to be careful for them and of them, and that care, we could never have walked away from that.
Right. Tell us a little bit about the title, But They Look So Happy. How did you come to that title, and what does it mean to you?
It's the title is very it's stuck with me deeply, because in talking about all our stories to people who were trying to understand theirs, I was sitting in a coffee shop talking to a lady, and she was we were both close to tears after, you know, hearing my story. And I turned on my computer, and there was a picture of us all walking in a park, and the photographer had actually captured our smiles. And my friend turned to me and she said, "But they look so happy." And she said it to me even though I was the they. And it just was, that's exactly it, because everywhere we went, people would say, "Oh, your boys are so quiet," or "Your boys are so this or so that," or "so polite and neat." In our home life, it was all chaos. And they, being us, we did look so happy, and yet we weren't. And it was the implied, "But they look so happy, so how come you weren't?" That just rooted itself deep inside. And my boys and I and my husband, we all loved the title. It just stuck. We couldn't get rid of it. We tried. We looked for others. There was a very, very close other title, if I never found them, which we liked as well. It just didn't hold us as much. So rightly or wrongly so, we stuck to But They Look So Happy, because it was our truth.
Yeah, and I think it's the truth for so many families, don't you think? And for many people, you know, they look so happy, but what is really going on behind the scenes? What's really going on emotionally for people? I think that title really is so provocative and makes us think, you know, well, what really does go on behind closed doors? What is it really like for people? So I feel like it's a title that really invites people to go, but actually what's really going on there, you know? And I think that this book does that so well. It really takes us, you know, you really take us inside your family and show us what it was like for you to deal with two children who had never ever learned how to trust, softness, kindness, love, and how threatening that was. I mean, that was one of the things that was hardest to read about the way your boys were formed emotionally when they were so young, was just that nothing that you relied on to, you know, to love them the ways we know how to love people, none of that worked because they didn't trust any of that. And so the other thing that is so remarkable to me, Xanti, is just how you just spent those 15 years looking for answers. You became an expert. You scoured every corner, I'm sure every Google search that has ever been done, everything that you could possibly do, and kept coming up against experts, you know, who said, "Well, have you tried this? And have you tried that? And have you tried this?" That must have been quite frustrating for you over those years to have tried. It felt like you'd looked for every possible solution, everything that you could do, and just never feeling like you had found the right answer.
Well, that's true. And the thing is, don't forget, this started 15, well, now it's more than 15 years ago, but when our story started, there wasn't Google, there wasn't smartphones. There wasn't at a click of a button you can find your answer. So it was a lot harder. And what I learned is that when it comes to adoption, at the very least, because that's my experience, not all the experts are actually the experts. And the people who become the experts don't talk, because it's taboo to say, "I haven't done a good job with my family." And it's taboo to actually, as a parent, say, I'm not sure if I made it. And it becomes very difficult because you feel alone. And as much as I searched, and maybe I didn't do the right searches, by the time I had got to the point where there was a click of the button, there was so much information and misinformation, and and you read and read and read, and a lot of the books that I read about were either adoptions having gone wrong from the child's point of view, or adoptions having gone fantastically right from the parent's point of view. And I think that's why it's so hard, because there's these two camps, the children versus the parents. And the children where adoption has gone right, and make no mistake, there are a lot of adoptions that do go right. I mean, there's no right and wrong, but the ones that are easier, those people have nothing to say. They don't want to stand up on a soapbox and go, I'm adopted and I've had a lovely life, and what are they going to say more? Yet the ones that have had a struggle, they are the ones that their voice goes out there, and then people either, split into the two camps. So that's, I've lost track.
I wanted to ask you, what are you hoping people will take away from reading this book, from sharing? You've shared yourself so vulnerably and so honestly with the reader. What are you hoping people will take away from reading this book?
I'm hoping that they learn, for one thing, that sometimes life comes along and takes a big turn and it's not what they expected, and that's okay, and that different is just different. It's not necessarily wrong. And I'm hoping that they learn, most of all, acceptance. We all fail at one thing or another. People often say to me, you shouldn't use that word, but I think these days we're so busy using positivity and strive. But, we do fail and we do make mistakes. And the lesson that I'd like people to understand is you can trust that you've made a mistake, but learn from it. Don't try and deny that, and don't try and say, I didn't fail. Accept that, but learn from it. Don't make yourself a prisoner to it. And that's what I'm hoping that they learn from my story anyway.
Well, as you're talking, I'm just thinking, I think parenting is just one series of mistakes after the other. I mean, I think that's just a given, and yours must have just been so extra charged, because it feels to me like the stakes for you were so high, because you had so wanted to get it right for those boys. You had that extra desire to come in and make things better for them. And so it's interesting. I hope that readers will also start to think about this word failure and what in the end it does mean, because really, Xanti, when I look at this book, this beautiful book that you have created, you have included in between the parts of the book beautiful hand drawings from one of your sons, and also one of your other son has included a commentary at the back about his views on adoption. So you really did manage to include your boys in the writing of this book. And I know also that you sat down and you read this book to them from start to finish. So, there is something incredibly beautiful about the whole journey that you have taken with these boys in the writing of this book that maybe can reframe the way that you think about that word failure, because this book stands together as a beautiful, eclectic mosaic of your story, your son's words, your other son's drawings, and this quirky little lizard that sort of runs along the pages. So how do you feel about that, and how do your boys feel about this book that's coming out?
Well, they did. Once I was at the stage where I felt the manuscript was more manuscript than a shitty draft, we sat down and they came to Mauritius and we read the story as it was at that stage, which was very close to what it is now. And the thing is that they had already given the approval, but I wasn't sure if they'd like what was in it, because I painted us in my truth. And so none of us at times come across nicely. At times we all come across a little bit slightly off. Yes, let's say that. And the thing is that, so I was very nervous, but when I read that, it was interesting for me, because in my mind I was writing for anyone touched by adoption, but I think my forefront was I was writing to a parent. And my sons actually got a different perspective as adopted children. So they actually started to see their story in a different light as well. And it explained some things that had gone wrong, that were out of my control, that maybe in their little children minds when they were small, they thought were, was my fault. They could now, as adults, see how things had gone wrong, and they could actually see a difference. It did a shift for them, and I kind of realized at that point that this can also be for the children of these stories, because they can just see a perspective of their development, of what might have gone wrong in their physicality, in their brain development, and the thing that makes them, gives them their character. It could change things. My sons have been very supportive of this, even though I've written out some, hard arguments that we've had that I was a bit worried about. They've both been very supportive of it, which is why the one of my sons wrote his feelings about adoption, and it's not a lot. He just contributed what he could and what his thoughts were at the time, and the other one allowed me to use his drawings.
I think that's just so beautiful. And so I'd like you to maybe speak a little bit now just about the writing of the book, because I know when you came to me, you said you'd never written before, that you're dyslexic, and all these things that you just knew you had the story in you, and but there were so many reasons not to do it, or so many obstacles in your way, and I know you were really, really nervous. But you committed yourself like a woman with a mission and with a timer going, and have done, how many drafts have you done? Can you tell us a little bit about the writing the book, some of the highs and lows?
Well, basically, yes. When I came to you, I did say, I like to call it a touch of dyslexia. I cannot tell you the difference between an English comma and a colon, and spelling has actively been my enemy all my life. And I really think that if it was, people often said to me, oh, you should write the story, and I mean, no, it's not. And if it wasn't for the fact that I felt so broken, I wouldn't have put pen to paper, or in my case, finger to keyboard. But the thing is that I found that once I'd spoken to you, that all those reasons to not do it, I thought people won't be interested, and I'll write these things that people won't understand because I'm spelling wrong and the grammar's wrong. And basically, actually, through you taught me not to worry about that and just to get the story out. And I can strongly recommend anyone, don't worry about, I did once have an English teacher, and he said to me, don't write the words write the feeling you want to feel. And you actually taught me how to understand what he was saying, really, because I think it's just so important to get our personal stories out, and I didn't think that I could do it. It was hard. So the very first draft that I wrote, I looked at it the other day, and it was terrible, but I was so proud of it at the time. So that one actually had to almost be trashed. I kept a lot of it, but then I did it went from first shitty draft to first draft. And then from that, it was a number of rewrites. I restructured it a few times. At first I didn't know how to edit, so I would go along editing for one thought process, and then start again and edit for another thought process, and which is really the worst way to do it, because by the time you've got something you're happy with, you're kind of sick of it, and at that point you've got to actually look at the whole thing and go, better restructure this and start all over again. It's been restructured a number of times. There was at one point where I thought, yeah, I'm nearly finished, and then I gave it to someone to read, and they said, this is excellent, but sorry, it's not. So there were quite a number of rewrites, and as far as I can tell, if Anne Lamott thinks that you can rewrite a number of times, then I think it's okay for me to have stumbled a few times. And I don't look at them as stumbles, because each time someone came back to me and said, what about this? Or I don't understand that. Or they misinterpreted what I said. It enabled me to actually come up with a better product. And so when I did send it to the editor and I got all this feedback back, at no point was I devastated, because at each point I went, oh, that's a good point, or that point's been misunderstood, I better write it so that the reader can understand it better. So I can't answer the question how many rewrites did I do, because my computer is filled with rewrites, and at some stages I rewrote part of what I was already rewriting, and things shuffled, and some of the most beautiful passages to me were thrown out. I've got whole chapters that I didn't use, and whole chapters that came in right at the end, and I've got things from that very first shitty draft. So I have got all levels of rewrites and processing that I have gone through to get to this point right now.
One of the most profound things for me, I feel like you'll really be the poster girl for Joanne Fedler Media's memoir, is you are a totally different person today than the woman that I met, 2.5 years ago. Like, it's almost, it's hard to believe that you are the same person that came to me. You were so broken. I mean, the image that I have in my mind is really of a little bird that with broken wings. It just was, how I felt when you first came to me. It was, you were in so much pain. And over the last 2.5 years, I've just watched, you fight your way back into, like, I just, like an eagle, just soaring, and you're about to become an author of your first book, because I have no doubt there will be more. So can you talk a little bit just about that transformation and how the writing has changed you?
Well, you're right. When I first started, I was broken. I was a woman on the verge of a nervous breakdown. I've stolen that from a movie from God knows when, but I was that close. And I'd be sitting near my swimming pool in this beautiful tropical island, and I would suddenly look at the clock and realize I'd been staring at one spot for hours. I had nothing but the deepest meditation and the worst things, because I was just so full of pain, and it was really hard to get up some days, and it was really hard. But I'd go out and people wouldn't know that. I'd go out and people would see the smiley, happy person, and when I laughed, it was a genuine laugh, but there was such heaviness that people didn't know. And I remember even once before I even came here, I looked at the mirror and I thought, how do you look so normal? Because inside I just felt so twisted with shame and guilt and sadness. And it started out through the writing. I have to say that my mentor, Joanne Fedler, she actually taught me
about your book.
She taught me, you taught me to actually connect back to myself through my writing, and that is exactly what I did. And the more I wrote, the more I connected, and the more I started to recognize myself, and the more I started to pull through that pain and suffering. And there were a lot of other things that happened along the way, but it was opening my eyes to looking at my life from a different angle, and to remove myself from blame. And I had been to therapy. We'd always gone to therapy. I had done all kinds of esoteric and meditation and various different modes of searching for happiness and truth and all of that. Aside from my children's story, none of that helped me like the writing did, because when you put something down, something chemical happens, or happened to me, and that I took all that pain and suffering that was from the back of my head, that was at some stages of my life a primal scream just going on and on and on. And it led out into the words. And so today I'm definitely a different person. I am, when I look at myself in the mirror, I can go, oh, that is what I meant when I said I was happy. That is what I meant when I said I was fine. And I had lost that. And also, you know, you go through, any parent will know that they are not the person that they were before they became a parent. Any parent will know that sometimes they will think they'll be one type of parent and then they learn that they have to be another type of parent. So that wasn't any different for me. I think the shift for me had to be a bigger shift, because my kids needed a person that was not a hippie. They needed someone who was more strict and held in the reins, even though that's not what they wanted. And my natural state is hippie. And so in writing and learning and seeing, I could recognize that little hippie coming through again. And so
I love that, because I feel like that there is a little hippie element to this book, even just the design of it. There's just you shine in this book. Your voice is so clear in this book. Your little, as I say, your little quirky sense of humor, who you are, the person that you are, your tender heart, all of that I feel is so captured in this book. And my hope is that this book will just land with a thud against every reader's heart. I know that this book is going to make people just, you know, cry and cheer for you at the end. I mean, some of the most beautiful final chapters I've ever read in any books, you know, is in your book, Xanti. You've done such a magnificent job with this book, and I am so incredibly proud to be the publisher of But They Look So Happy. So I just want to wish you and this little book, as it goes out into the world, you know, a magnificent journey into other people's hearts. You have worked so hard to get to this point. You know, I'm so in awe of the work that you have done to get to this place. I know that it hasn't been easy. I know there've been such sort of low moments, even in the writing, but you have just picked yourself up every time and come back stronger and stronger and stronger. And I really do believe that this book is not only a tribute to the love that you have for your sons, but, you know, to the love and self-compassion that you found along the way and in the writing of this book, which to me is also just such a beautiful message for anybody who is thinking about sharing their story. So I want to thank you for choosing me to be your publisher, and thank you for trusting me to lead you on this journey. And I hope that this book just, you know, flies and as I say, lands in many, many places, and brings hope and joy to every reader that picks this book up.
Well, thank you so much. It's such beautiful words about my book and about my writing. Thank you so much. And yeah, I do hope that it helps some people. And if it doesn't, I hope that at least the funny bits make people laugh.
that it will. Thank you so much for your time today, Xanti. It's been wonderful chatting to you. Xanti's book, But They Look So Happy, is going to be published by Joanne Fedler Media in October 2018. Please make sure to get your copy. Thank you.